Hello and welcome to this afternoon's event on the Geopolitics of Eurovision, organized under the Center for Geopolitics and with the support of ChemSeas. My name is Elvira Tamush and here's my colleague Julia Breton. We are research assistants at the Center for Geopolitics, an interdisciplinary space created in 2015 by leading academics to consider within their historical context the world's most pressing current geopolitical questions. Our center seeks to deepen the study of grand strategy and statecraft at the University of Cambridge, offer innovative opportunities for collaboration with practitioners, and deliver impactful engagement with the wider world.
This event aims to explore the recent geopolitical histories of the Eurovision Song Contest across various countries and various years. While Eurovision, which is an annual international song competition between members of the European Broadcasting Union, was designed to be non-political, internationally friendly and fun, it is, and with these contexts in mind, also inherently a political event.
This is all the more pertinent this year in relation to the decision by the European Broadcasting Union not to ban Israel as a participant, despite its war in Gaza, which has claimed more than 30,000 lives, according to local health authorities. This has caused controversy in comparison to their decision to ban Russia just one day after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
And the EBU claimed it did not wish to ban Israel because the competition was non-political and because Israel met all the competition rules. But as experts have noted, if the EBU had banned Israel, other countries would also have had a higher registration cost to pay and hence may have withdrawn from the contest. So it's both a political event and an economic event. But this has also sparked calls to boycott Eurovision as well as widespread protests, not least because the decision seems to contradict the message of peace and unity supported by Eurovision, including in the slogan this year of United by Music. And some of these protests include one earlier this week in Malmö, which is hosting Eurovision this year, of 12,000 people. 12,000 people, and also a petition to the EBU's Director General, which has nearly 50,000 signatures. But there are also previous entrants who have stated that some countries cannot afford to boycott Eurovision, including Jamala, who won Eurovision for Ukraine in 2016 with a song about Stalin's deportation of Crimean Tatars during the Second World War, who said that the contest was necessary for Ukraine to remind Europe of Russia's invasion.
Alongside this year's context, we will discuss broader geopolitical issues around Eurovision this afternoon, including how the contest has variously inspired national identity, international allegiance, cross-cultural awareness, LGBTQ+ rights, and the nature of and the feeling of being part of Europe.
We hope the event will be informative and encourage greater awareness of the various geopolitical aspects of Eurovision and how it demonstrates as well as shapes identities. And we also hope it will encourage you to watch Eurovision critically or perhaps choose not to watch at all.
Alongside this context, we want to briefly summarize how Eurovision is organized. The contest is an international song competition, one of the most well-known ones, if not the most well-known song competition in the world. It is held on an annual basis by the European Broadcasting Union. The first Eurovision was held in 1956, inspired by the Festival della Canzone Italiana, the Sanremo music festival, which had been organized since 1951. In the past 6 decades, Eurovision became the longest-running international music competition on television and one of the longest-running television programs in the world. Singers and groups represent their own countries. Each participating state sends a singer or a group of up to 6 people who perform an original song live. The event is transmitted to national broadcasters via the Eurovision and Euradio networks. Countries cast votes for the other countries' songs to determine a winner. The public votes make up 50% of the votes, and the other half is determined by a professional jury. Traditionally, Eurovision is held in the country which won the preceding year's event, and therefore the contest provides a kind of opportunity to promote the host country and the host city as a tourist destination for the attendees of the event. There are five countries, the UK, Spain, France, Germany and Italy, the so-called Big Five, who automatically qualify to the final because they make the biggest financial contribution to the event.
So with that summary and history in mind, we'd like to welcome our first speaker, Galina Mijevich, who is a senior lecturer at the School of Journalism, Media and Culture at Cardiff University. Previously, Galina taught at several UK universities and was the Gorbachev Media Research Fellow at the University of Oxford from 2008 to 2012. Galina has an extensive publication record in the field of media, culture and area studies. Galina led the leadership grant on media representations of LGBTQ+ in Russia from 2018 to 2020, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. He regularly reviews grant applications for the European and British Research Councils. Galina was a visiting scholar at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University in fall of 2023. Galina.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored and pleased to be at this event. Actually, was a bit relaxed. I thought I'm not going to be first, so you took me off guard slightly. And I'm very grateful for everybody's attendance because, on such a sunny, wonderful Saturday evening, I didn't expect too many people in the audience. I thought you're already preparing and kind of celebrating the upcoming Eurovision contest, or not celebrating, boycotting and drinking in a park. So thank you for coming and kind of attending it in person. When I started working on Eurovision in 2010, which is quite a long time ago, it wasn't such a focus of academic research, and I published a couple of papers, and I think people kind of in academia looked at me slightly kind of, what is going on there? But it seems like, now it's quite at the forefront of the academic and other communities, partially due to their geopolitical reasons. And I will touch upon them partially, and I will explain how the geopolitics is played out in Eurovision since I started looking at it closely from 2010, and I will use examples of Russia and Ukraine, how they position themselves within the Eurovision contest, coming from this European enlargement, Eastern European kind of perspective. As you can see, I'm starting with this year's motto, United by Music, which is quite controversial, as you very helpfully explained. I feel like you covered some of the ground for me, so thank you so much. But I will, as I said, I will start with these current issues, and I will focus specifically on sexual excess at the Eurovision as a nation branding tool by Russia and Ukraine, which is also helpful because looking in retrospect, we can see how Russia was changing its nation branding since, let's say, 2010, and becoming more and more assertive in its presentation in Eurovision. And similarly, like you mentioned, in Ukraine, the entrants became more and more politicized, bringing clear messages from Crimean Tatars and the like. So very briefly, this is what I will be talking about. My presentation contains 34 slides with very little imagery, and I can assure you I'm not going to be going into great detail. I will explain it in kind of more accessible terms, but I thought I'll put it there in case further you're interested and there are further kind of questions. It's all there. So I'm not going to bore you with the 34 pages of PowerPoint presentation. I would love to show you the videos of the two performers, but I think it's going to delay us. So if you have time, you can watch them because they're quite, they're not recent entries, so you might actually never kind of saw them before. It's Dima Bilan from Russia and Verka Serdyuchka from Ukraine, which I'm going to be talking in more details. So as you already very helpfully outlined, the Eurovision Song Contest was initiated in 1956 with the sole purpose and the main primary goal of unification of post-war Europe. And this is the goal which they are striving to adhere today. But as we can see, it's becoming more and more challenging with every passing year with the growing number of geopolitical rifts and conflicts. I think the issue which we witness right now, especially this year with the Israeli entry, is becoming more kind of, it shows the more pronounced geopolitical aspects. However, as many specialists would like to acknowledge, that we cannot compare different conflicts, and we cannot state that, for example, Russia-Ukraine conflict is similar or the same as situation in the Gaza Strip. So in this case, kind of we open the debates for academic community, what to do with the scholars, for example, from these countries, and for Eurovision Union, Broadcasting Union, it also kind of represents a dilemma, whether they follow the same rule for these countries or they pursue a different route, and we see that they did, and it's causing a number of rifts. For example, boycotts in many countries, not only in Malmö. I'm currently involved in a project in Finland, and they are staging today boycotts in Helsinki. And I think Finns partially happy that they didn't win last year's Eurovision, because they will be facing tough costs of bearing security and safety of organizing this year's contest. So, but kind of to continue with the details which you helpfully outlined. There are 6 members which we know will participate, and the others need to qualify. And I'm not going to go into any further details with the recent changes in voting procedures and the controversies related to that. I'm sure if you're here, you're all familiar with the Eurovision Union, Eurovision Song Contest rules and changes related to that. What I would like to talk to you about here is the actual philosophy or ideology of the contest, which is kitsch, camp, also called Eurotrash. And if you ask anybody, what do you think about Eurovision? I'm sure you're not going to find anybody sitting on the fence. Either people are going to be very polarized. They either love it or they hate it. Unless you probably ask people from other continents who have very vague idea of what the Eurovision is about. So it's a highly divisive, highly effective event, and as I was trying to show through my research, countries are using it to claim a certain stake and place within the European community, and they have a very highly vested interest in this contest, and they take it very seriously. They invest a lot of money, and this is part of their soft nation branding strategies. There are different strategies of smaller states and slightly bigger countries, obviously not only in terms of resources, but in terms of their geopolitical standing. For example, bigger countries like Russia, they might choose to have songs in the native language. They basically claiming a certain power and authority. We don't have to sing in English, for example, while smaller countries might play different type of games. So here, obviously, we can compare Eurovision Song Contest to Olympic Games, which is also becoming more and more politicized and is also largely seen as a soft power and a nation branding tool. To bring it home, it's not kind of an easy topic to discuss, but obviously, for example, voting procedures are also largely linked to geopolitics. We know about the bloc voting. Certain countries vote for their neighbors, so it's tit for tat. And for the last couple of years, we know that Britain is really competing for the last place in the voting league. And I'm myself originally from Belarus, and when Belarus was allowed to participate, it was a competition between Belarus and Britain, who is going to come at the end of the voting table. So unfortunately, we can see the geopolitics in play there as well. So as I said, I'll briefly talk about the general aspect of geopolitics and the contest as the barometer of public opinion, but I'll focus specifically on its ideology, and I will show how it works within the performance of Ukrainian and Russian singers. So briefly to touch on geopolitics, as you very clearly mentioned, it's never been far away from politics, and the European Broadcasting Union very much struggling every year to police and control what's going on. We know that the Russian performers were banned from 2022. They're trying to ban any overt political messages. This year, they were not that overt. They were quite covert. If you saw, there were kind of messages written in very ancient script with the pro-Palestine kind of support, which EBU was asking to remove one of the performers. And there were further regulations on the clothing as well in this year's contest. And as I read in my news feed, one performer actually just got banned from the performer from Netherlands. Netherlands got banned because of indecent or inappropriate behavior towards the member of the organizing team. However, they're tracing some links to him performing with Russian performer some time ago, and they're kind of alleging that this may be somehow related. So as we can see, the EBU really struggling to police and control everything. And some messages which are very clear and overt, they're more easier to manage, while some more covert messages, they still might be smuggled in via lyrics, clothes, or performance itself. As we saw this year, the political stance is very pronounced via boycotts. And unusually this year, we can see the stance of performers coming to the fore, because before we discussed the nation branding at the states, you know, presenting themselves at this arena, but we kind of assumed that the performers have agency, but in reality, we don't know how much agency they have within the actual setup of the show, how much the creative team is telling them what to do, what dress to wear, what message to transmit. And this year, those performers who decided not to boycott or somehow in any other way influence the contest decision, they actually signed the petition, which I think is a new development. The performers are becoming an actual agency, the actual group which expressing their certain moral authority and transmitting a certain message, which, you know, we don't know what's going to happen next year, but I found this is interesting development within this year. So this is it about the Eurovision as kind of current, ongoing, hot topic which we already discussed. And here I would like to focus on the contest's assumed ideology, which is also used and has been used by lots of entries to express their positionality and certain, articulate certain standpoint within Europe, which is also part of geopolitics. And this was particularly pronounced recently, by recently I mean the last 20 years or so, when European Union enlarged dramatically and newcomers from Eastern Europe kind of were allowed to participate, and there was this redefinition of the European space and Europeanness as what we understand under that. And what I claim in my research that these newcomers use this idea of kitsch and cam and trash culture to claim a stake within this Europeanness. And the kind of older participating countries were looking at these newcomers kind of a little bit from upside down, and the newcomers really needed to work hard to show that they understand this language and they actually can fit in. And I will show you how it worked in case with Russia and Ukraine. So kitsch is a primary form of excess, as you can see, has assumed the role of the governing aesthetics and imaginary, and it was stated by Allison in 2007. So I'm not going to go into details about the kitsch and camp to a great degree. Kitsch as a form of bad taste is quite, I think, clear, and it is a mocking imitation of high cultural forms. So basically, the worse it is, the better it is in the performance. So the more obscene, the more carnivalesque it is, the kind of more successful the entry might become. And camp as a deliberate and self-acknowledged theatricality became kind of a very widespread currency within the contest. So camp as a deliberate bad taste, and basically all the participating countries are competing who can perform better in that, who can excel in that. And in this case, we arrive in at what I call Euro trash, as an ever-increasing kitchification, which is chipping away at the conventions of the good high cultural taste, which allows this symbolic production to continue. And basically, we need to see who can be more successful in exceeding the bounds of good taste. So Conchita Wurst, this is Verka Serdyuchka, which I'm going to talk about. They're just some of the examples, but I'm sure if you look at every single year, you'll find a number of entries which actually signify this point. So the Eurotrash is a tool which delineates the imaginary boundaries of Europe, and culture of bad taste provides a recognizable idiom within which participating states can position themselves with regards to the rest of Europe. So as I said, Eurotrash has condescension towards the other Europe, the newly joined European states, which in turn are trying to master the language of Eurotrash in order to catch up. So in this case, I was using these ideas to see the nation branding of the two states, and in particular, I was looking at the excessive sexuality and excessive aesthetics of their performers. And I started by looking at the Eastern European entries, and it was clearly that it was very frequently framed within traditional gender models with all the excess and flamboyance, because they were addressing this Western gaze, which kind of exotic and accessible European other. And kind of they were working within this framework. This is Ukrainian entries, primeval kind of sexuality, or folk rural sexuality, or another entry, Labadaba, Ukraine, or traditional gender model of Polish Donata, who was, for those of you who are not familiar, preparing butter from milk by rhythmically, by repeated rhythmical movements. So, and then I kind of looked at the very, let's say, aberrations from this, entries which would fall kind of out of this traditional gender models. And in Russian case, there were entries by Bilan or Tatu. If you're not familiar, it's allegedly lesbian duo, which represented Russia at one point. And in the case of Ukraine, it was Verka Serdyuchka, which is not a drag performer, but an imitation, the closest which comes to the drag performer in Ukrainian culture. So what these performances tell us that Russia is using sexual excess both to rebel and ironically put a stake within this competition. So basically the performers would be very artificial, very kind of excessive in their performance. Let's say in this case, we had a figure skater, we had a Stradivarius violin, and a performer with climbing on the piano, combining high and low cultural tastes. And with the case of Tatu, they just came out in T-shirts and very kind of dismissive attitude, kind of singing their song in Russian, kind of asserting certain dissidence and disobedience. But what we saw in both of these formats, that they were bringing the message or broadcasting the message not necessarily only to the Western audience, they were talking to the domestic audience and to the former Soviet Union countries. And while talking to the Western audience, they were asserting themselves as a power, which is kind of playing a little bit to the rules of Eurovision, but then, you know, we're mimicking and modeling ourselves. We are kind of wearing T-shirts, very casual attire, but then the girls were very made up. They were very careful in what they were doing in terms of it was well staged and very kind of well thought. So they are mimicking the Western formats, but they are showing at the same time they don't really agree with those. Similarly with Dima Bilan, who presented himself here as a kind of a symbol of global gay culture. He is branding himself at home as a heterosexual man, while in reality, you know, it's very questionable. But in both cases, the performance played kind of a double game where for the Western audience, they were presenting themselves as a non-heteronormative performers, while back home, they were known, especially Tattoo, that it's a fake lesbian project. And it was also part of the ploy where kind of we are fooling the Western audience by packaging it the way they want to see us and the way we exploit their global gay culture. So this is kind of what we saw in case of Russia, where this kind of a completely different direction, and I'm not going to go into that, but the idea of homosexuality, which right now is quite negatively portrayed in Russian Federation with all these very strict laws, anti-LGBT laws, but it started not now, it was all going on for quite a while, where they were perceiving West and Western homoerotism as decadent and kind of which wasn't kind of in line with Russian values, but at the same time they were playing along the trash culture by presenting their performance as highly in tune with this Western gay camp imagery, right? So this is kind of, in a nutshell, what we see with the case of Russia. And as I said, Russian entries, they are not really necessarily complying with this Eurotrash culture, and they are threading between kind of playing along Western imagination of Russia, but at the same time asserting their own kind of post-imperial power, saying that kind of if you want to sing in Russian, we will perform in Russian. If you want to kind of do very low-key entries without the show, we're going to do that. And this kind of progressed, especially after Dima Bilan, but they had lots of single author, single performer entry where the girl would come in a very long white dress, sing a song about a mother, and without any special effects, kind of. This is progressively increased since Dima Bilan performed a third in Russia, changing stance in geopolitics, where they became more and more assertive and kind of demonstrating lack of or unwillingness to comply with the culture of Eurotrash. While with the case of Ukraine, I was looking, as I said, at all of these traditional heteronormative, highly sexualized female performances, and then we have Verka Serdyuchka. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this performer. If not, please do go and watch any of his songs, because the image which he projected at the Eurovision, it's not a one-off, it's actual his career, which was built on the image of this train conductor woman with a very kind of pronounced shapes, and you can clearly see that in some instances, especially at the Eurovision, he is not hiding his masculinity. It's all done kind of quite purposefully, kind of clearly mix of female and male kind of features. It's not a very kind of sleek and ideal drag image. So in this case, it's a carnival and it's a parody. And he's using his well-established image, which is first act approximating drag in mainstream Ukrainian and Russian TV. He is not, at that time, he wasn't only a Ukrainian performer, he was exceptionally popular in Russia, and he was kind of traveling and living between two countries. So he would address a broader audience as he performed at the Eurovision. And his figure is particularly interesting because he was one of these emerging performers benefiting of the post-broadcast divide. So he built up his career on the traditional and the new media, and he was addressing this broader Russian-speaking post-Soviet audiences, some of whom were quite nostalgic for the Soviet features and the Soviet Union, which he exploited, Soviet cultural memories. So he was this very interesting hybrid, benefiting from the mainstream pop culture, but at the same time mocking it and criticizing it. So a so-called hybrid insider as outsider. And in his performance, which I wanted to show you, but I think I would really urge you to watch it, he is speaking on so many elements, including sexual freedom, including geopolitics, and all of this exaggerated and to some extreme obscene, where he is dressed up in star on his head, maybe alluding to the Kremlin stars. And there are also images related to the pioneers. There are images related to the pornography, to the Second World War. Then he dressed up in a very short silver dress with a 69 at the back. When he runs on the stage, he's pestering his team, especially the female members of the team, slapping them on their bottoms. So everything is so grotesque and basically to so much excess that you cannot really kind of stop watching it. It's so bad that you just want to watch it. And his masculinity is quite obvious beneath a purposefully chosen, glamorous, that yet unflattering, completely unflattering female dress. So in terms of geopolitics, as I said, he is addressing multiple audiences. He is addressing Western audience, he is addressing Ukrainian audience, Russian, and the whole Russian-speaking community, because people who grown up in Soviet Union, they can decipher these messages. So when I started with the messages which we talked about, with the certain messages written on hands this year's Eurovision, or the Palestinian kind of symbolic scarf on the hand of one performer, is quite clear. So these images can be deciphered by majority of the audience. You don't need a special knowledge. However, these performances are filled with these very particular cultural clues, and only people who grown up in this environment will decipher them. Because when we start talking about European Broadcasting Union banning certain titles or banning certain songs, they can ban only very clear-cut messages. In this case, Verkar Serdyuchka was singing the phrase which was resembling Russia goodbye. If you remember, it was Lasha Tumbai. And he was still allowed to participate because at that time, probably the contest wasn't that politicized, but at the same time, the message was quite covered because the whole song was in a number of languages. It was German, it was English, it was Ukrainian, so he could clearly say that it's not Russia goodbye, it's some sort of gibberish in some language because it was fitted with the whole obscene performance which he presented. So in this case, you know, part of this rebellious message kind of seeped through and it wasn't banned. So you know, as I said, we can also see the development and politicization of the contest as we witness, because currently I think if Ukraine would try to participate with this type of message, they would say, no, 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 you cannot put this type of messages through. So as I said, in this case, what we see in geopolitically, it's not necessarily only claiming a place among the European Union countries or European communities, but also challenging Russia as a very powerful neighbor, then also addressing the post-Soviet kind of memories, public who has memories of all these elements which are there, kind of Soviet types of weddings in the village where people would use this very particular type of melody to dance after drinking and eating at the wedding, a certain kind of use of instruments like accordion, which all the generation would refer to because it was the only musical instrument in the village, for example. And at the same time, by bringing Soviet pioneer uniform and the dresses of the nurses and soldiers of the Second World War, they are claiming a stake among people who were brought up on the memories of the Second World War, domestic audience, larger, broader Russian-speaking audience, and at the same time addressing the West. Because let's say, not only Russia, but Ukraine, they have a very particular perception of certain liberal values, Western values, like political correctness. It's not necessarily they agree with them, and they might be very critical towards them. So this is a way of mocking political correctness. So indirect, rebellious message towards the West, where, you know, we appreciate these things within your culture, but we don't agree with other elements. So in this case, as I'm trying to say that when we talk about geopolitics, it can be more nuanced rather than boycotts or personal kind of petitions. It can be something which is inbuilt into the message, and this message might not necessarily be directed to only particular audience. It can be directed simultaneously to a number of audiences, and audiences within the time. It's not only audience which are kind of represented within this time and space, but also talking to audiences in the past, claiming affiliation with culture of the Soviet Union, for example. So just to conclude, this is the last aspect which I wanted to mention earlier, but I think it's a good case to use to finish my presentation. When we talk about the European Song Contest, we remember that it was an event which was broadcast on one day, and when we had only television sets, we all sat down at the same time and watched it at the same time. But when we talk about the contest as we see it right now, it is no longer a one-day event. That's why we have all this build-up. We have all the discussions because we have in-country rounds, we have finals, semi-finals, and it's all mediated. We can go on YouTube starting with in-country rounds and watch for 3 months. We can mediate via social media, and thus we kind of move into a completely different phenomenon rather than something which was transmitted on a particular day. So maybe European Broadcasting Union should address this as part of the moderation procedure. And this is one of the examples how the digital environment alters and kind of spreads and extends the geopolitics. This, for example, image of Verka Serdyuchka outfit was then modeled on, at that time, Ukrainian president in some of the online discussions, which was used as a meme later on. So we can see that this kind of geopolitical kind of flavor can be enhanced and amplified by the mediation via social media networks and other channels of multi-platform post-broadcast era. So to conclude, apologies, I think I took slightly longer than planned. We kind of see, for example, with this post-Soviet nation branding of Russia and Ukraine, which in the entries which I used, which were before 2014, which represent a certain kind of phase of the geopolitical competition and staging at that time, but I think they can still very much inform us and kind of make us clearly see the development since then, which kind of indicated the shift in geopolitical landscape. And in this case, my claim that the kitsch, in this case, should be also pretty much seen as closely intertwined with geopolitics. So in this case, the Russia's pre-2022 entries show a particular way of presenting Russia as a nation brand and show a number of contradictions in the packaging of Russia for Eurovision. At the same time, they demonstrate the country's evolving capacity for sophisticated and compelling symbolic production, because Russia was investing a lot of resources in the soft power, nation branding and nation building, which at the same time shows the importance of this direction for Russia. So they can be disparaging the Eurovision, but at the same time they are investing a lot of money in Eurovision because they are interested in broadcasting certain image of the country on the European arena. And at the same time, Ukrainian entries, as just one way of concluding, obviously there are lots of dimensions. Ukrainian entries, for example, in case of Serdyuchka, were also multi-layered. For some audience were sending a comforting message of superiority, kind of engaging in this polemic with Russia, and then also trying to talk to the Western counterparts, which can be also addressed not only in directly appreciative way, but the way of kind of fooling them or kind of questioning the progressive modernity of the West, which kind of projected on the Eastern European countries, and kind of it's the discussion between us and them, how the West is seeing us, how we see the West, and how we want to present ourselves to the West. So kind of to cut a long story short, I think I'm going to finish here, but I would really encourage you to watch at least Verka Serdyuchka entry if you haven't done so.
And I'm very happy to introduce our second speaker who's joining us with pre-recorded video, Dr. Paul Jordan, who is an expert on the Eurovision Song Contest and published his PhD on the subject in 2011, followed by 2 books in 2014 and 2015. He has been a media commentator on Eurovision for over 15 years and worked behind the scenes on the contest between 2015 and 2018. Paul was part of the international jury for the French national selection for Eurovision, Destination Eurovision, and in 2019 and in 2023, so just last year, he appeared as a jury member on Eurosong, the Irish selection for the contest. Paul has watched Eurovision since he was a child and has attended the event since 2000. And that is exactly what he's doing at the moment, and that's why he cannot join us today. But yeah, we're going to watch his presentation.
Hi there, my name is Paul Jordan, and today I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of some of my research findings on the Eurovision Song Contest. I published my PhD on the event, specifically looking at Estonia and Ukraine back in 2011. So for me, Eurovision is a really interesting avenue and platform to explore. I also want to say thank you for having me today, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. Now, for me, Eurovision is a really interesting event because as someone interested in national identity and identity politics, it's almost a perfect medium to explore these issues. As someone who grew up to Scottish parents in England and felt very much Scottish, but also British, European, there's all sorts of feelings and different kind of forms of identity. Eurovision really brought some of that out. I also then attended it as a fan in 2000 and wrote my PhD on the event and published that in 2011, followed by my book, as well as working in the media and also on the contest itself. So I've got a lot of different kind of perspectives on the contest, but I still think it's an amazing event and I'm very proud to have been associated with it. Now, Eurovision started in the 50s, and I think sometimes people often think the aims were political from the outset. And I think it was actually more about pioneering new broadcasting techniques, bringing public broadcasters together. And it was very much an experiment in live television. If we think about, broadcasting those days, certainly was in its infancy. Black and white television, satellite, all of those things were pretty, it was pretty much in the early days. But I think one of the things which people think about Eurovision was that it was to unite Europe. That was one of the consequences, I think, but the original aims were, as I say, to pioneer those new broadcasting techniques. Now, one of the things that Eurovision is criticised for is that there's politics involved. Now, it's not political, it's a non-political event, but I would argue that politics does come into it, just like it does for the World Cup. We saw that in Qatar, just like it does with the Olympic Games, and we saw that in Beijing. So I think, it's one of these things. It's a large-scale international event, and when you have those, politics does sometimes intrude, even in the unlikely of circumstances. As someone who was part of the Eurovision Research Network, my colleagues and I, we explored these issues, and we certainly found that a lot of the debates in Eurovision really reflected what was happening across wider society. And you can really see some of the changes in Eurovision really reflecting, I think, some of the political changes. You can see that obviously in the participation map, which expanded massively after the collapse of communism. Also some of the more nuanced debates around European identity and as well as national identity. So, for example, the Netherlands and their failure to qualify in 2005 for the grand final was held up by the Dutch press as an example of power somehow slipping eastwards. And you can see certainly those debates coming out in the Brexit referendum in 2016. So there's a lot of identity politics and a lot of issues which really come out when looking at the Eurovision Song Contest. And before I come on to talk about my case studies on Estonia and Ukraine, I wanted to just touch on a couple of issues of geopolitics which have manifested throughout the history of the contest, and certainly Turkey, Greece, Cyprus is a really good example. So Greece and Cyprus entered in the 70s, but it wasn't until later on that they actually took part in the same competition. They refused to share the same event. And tensions were obviously heightened by the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, and indeed the entry in 76 from Greece actually was about the invasion of Cyprus. So it's been a tense moment, but it's also been one which has reflected changes later on. So when Turkey won in 2003, the Cypriot spokesperson declared peace to Cyprus, Turkey 8 points. So you've really already got that kind of element of politics being related to the song contest and also reflecting what's happening. And it's also been noted that the change in attitude really did come after the 99 earthquake in Turkey, of which Greece provided humanitarian support for the first time, and you then saw exchanging of votes in Eurovision. You know, that's obviously a difficult thing to prove whether that's related or not, but certainly it reflects, I think, improved relations between the countries. Azerbaijan and Armenia is another example of geopolitics intruding in the Eurovision Song Contest. And, you know, in 2009, the postcard before the Armenian entry depicted a statue which was in Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan complained, and for the grand final, it was edited out. But during the voting, Armenia held up that very statue, a picture of that very statue. So you can really see the geopolitics really coming out there. That was also the year that it was alleged that people who voted for Armenia in Azerbaijan were called in for questioning. And the following year, Armenia's entry, Apricot Stone, could be read as political. It could be seen as a song actually about Nagorno-Karabakh. So you've already got that kind of tension between those two countries really showing itself on the Eurovision stage. 2012, Eurovision went to Baku, the most easterly Eurovision. It was 4 hours ahead of the UK time, 3 hours ahead of Central European time. Very different contest, but also it took place effectively in a dictatorship. And the ruling family, you can see them on the slide there. Meriban Alieva, she's the first lady. She was involved actually in some of the organisation of the contest, and the president really did take quite a close interest in the event as well. So it was very challenging in terms of, you know, media discourses, and you could really argue that Azerbaijan's Eurovision almost backfired. You know, they wanted to host the event, but they didn't want the scrutiny which came with it. So probably one of the most political Eurovisions ever, but a very interesting experience. I'm going to talk to you very briefly now about my own research, which looked at Estonia and Ukraine. And, you know, Estonia was the first so-called Eastern European country to win, the first former Soviet country, certainly. And, you know, it was a big deal for them. They were certainly EU aspirant at the time. They were concluding their EU accession talks, and the whole organisation of Eurovision in 2002 in Tallinn was around presenting Estonia in the most positive terms. Also, the theme for that year was that of modern fairy tale, and Estonia was seen as a country which had awoken from its slumbers, eager to take its place in Europe. And the link between Estonia's history was made the very next day after they won, when the Prime Minister declared that they had freed themselves from the Soviet Empire through singing, and now would walk through the door singing. So you've got that link between the so-called singing revolution and also Eurovision itself and their victory. It came certainly at the right time for Estonia. They were keen to project a positive international image, and they launched a nation branding campaign to capitalise on the back of Eurovision and the publicity that engendered. So right from the start, geopolitics was involved, and certainly it was Estonia's first opportunity to really say something to the world on its own terms, since independence. Now, Ukraine's journey is somehow different. Ukraine, I guess it can be seen as a bit of a reflection of some of the developments in Ukraine. You know, Ukraine joins Eurovision almost a decade later, can be seen as a reflection of, you know, Ukraine's kind of piecemeal independence in that sense. You know, they didn't ratify the constitution until 1996, and it was actually the idea of a PR company to join Eurovision. They approached the public broadcaster and said that this was a good opportunity. They pointed out the example of Estonia, and it was very much from the PR perspective. It was very much about presenting Ukraine as a different country and really kind of, I guess, reimagining Ukraine's international image. In 2004, they won the contest with Ruslana, and again, she became a political figure. She was very much involved in the so-called Orange Revolution after the victory in 2004. And that quote there, you see, you know, they made the link really from Ukraine's international image. And there was a real thing about Chernobyl, certainly, as well as allegations of corruption. So, you know, Ukraine really had a challenging image issue, and Eurovision was very much seen as part of the solution to that. And that's Ruslana's quote there. She spoke about how she wanted people to forget about Chernobyl and she wanted to open up her country. But she became a very vocal and influential political figure later on. And there she is at the so-called Orange Revolution with the President Yushchenko, who was poisoned during the debate, during the election, and, you know, so it became worldwide news. It was a really big news story, and at the same time they're also trying to organise Eurovision as well. So the eyes of the world were on Ukraine at the time. They hosted the event in 2005, and again, geopolitics coming in. The slogan that year was Awakening. You can see that as a link to certainly the post-revolution Ukraine. They argued that it was about Kiev in springtime. Now, I'm quite cynical about that. I think it was certainly linked to what was happening in the country at the time. Now, because of the revolution, there were massive delays in the organisation of the contest, and it was actually threatened to be withdrawn from Ukraine. The EBU stepped in, and Svantis Doxelius, the then executive supervisor, was taken to a meeting with Yushchenko, where he personally got involved in the organisation of the competition. The Ukrainian entry that year was really controversial. It was a political song. They had to change the lyrics to the song. It was a song from the revolution, which was inserted as a so-called wild card by one of the ministers. I think it was the Minister of Culture. And, you know, the Annie Lorak, she was the front runner. She was very much sidelined in favour of what effectively could be seen as the government's choice. Now, it was a public vote, but the fact that that was inserted as a wild card by a politician is very curious, at least. So they went on to represent Ukraine, and you know, again, it was political. They had handcuffs on in the performance, and at the end of the performance, they had broken them, reflecting a freer Ukraine post-revolution. Yushchenko himself wanted to make a speech in the event, and he was asked not to. He was told that he could present the trophy. He wasn't allowed to do his speech. You know, it would have been obviously wholly inappropriate. But the fact that someone who was so famous at that time, and he was a statesman, he was in the press almost daily, he was known around the world. The fact that he wanted to go on that stage really shows the significance of Eurovision for Ukraine wanting to present a different image, and it also shows you how linked it was with geopolitics at the time. Politics in Ukraine is never far away, and we see that with the 2012 selection of Gaetana, a mixed-race singer, and she was criticised by a politician who said that she wasn't an organic representative of Ukrainian culture, clearly very racist. Again, it shows you, you know, identity politics is very much alive when it comes to Eurovision. Ukraine's win in 2016 was a bit of a surprise. Certainly, the Russian delegation were very disappointed. I think to lose with their biggest singer was painful, but to lose to Ukraine was even more painful. To lose to Ukraine with the song about Crimea was really unacceptable, and the Russian delegation were not happy at all. At this point, I was working on the song contest as part of the communications team, and I saw firsthand the fallout from this, and it was very, very challenging. You had a lot of issues with the Russian delegation the following year, and certainly it was very memorable, but probably not for the right reasons. 2017 was a very challenging year in Kyiv, and you can again see the debates with Russia and the delegation not confirming they were attending until the last minute, and then choosing a singer who'd been to Crimea against Ukrainian law. There were all sorts of issues, and that was definitely, I think, a very cynical game by Russia. They also happened to select a singer who was a wheelchair user in the year that Ukraine was celebrating diversity. That was the slogan. It was really quite challenging. The arch that you see there in the picture is an arch of friendship that was built during Soviet times between Russia and Ukraine. The organisers decided to paint this as a rainbow arch, again symbolising that diversity, but nationalist protesters in Ukraine stopped it happening, and you can see there that it wasn't quite completed. I think that's a reflection and almost a kind of somehow a sort of metaphor for Ukraine's advancement in terms of LGBT rights. It's sort of only gone so far, and that's really a kind of pictorial example of that. So very challenging year in the year of celebrating diversity. Ukraine's broadcaster was actually fined by the EBU for the way in which they organised the contest. Russia, interestingly, was not, despite, I think, what was a very cynical geopolitical game. You can also see, again, Crimea coming up time and time again, and in 2019, Ukraine actually had to withdraw from the contest after the winner was questioned about whether Crimea is Ukraine or not in a faux rehearsal for a press conference. She was also unhappy, apparently, with some of the contractual obligation. She was wanted to perform in Russia, she wasn't allowed, she withdrew, and other artists withdrew in solidarity. So Ukraine were effectively left without a representative. So you've already got that kind of geopolitics included and intruding yet again. 2022, of course, the war in Ukraine. This is a bold move by the EBU. Normally they would shy away from things like this. I think it became untenable when the Russian broadcasters started to broadcast propaganda, and that's effectively why they were not allowed in the competition, and also with Belarus as well. But it's really tricky because it's a bit of a conundrum, because now they've taken this stance, and certainly, you know, is that sustainable? It was a big loss in terms of losing Russia, but also you've got other situations. You've got Azerbaijan, you've got Israel. Where is the line between what is political and what is not? And certainly this is very much on the agenda this year. Ukraine's win in 2022, big moment for the country. I would argue it wasn't necessarily political. It was more a showing of solidarity and humanitarianism, but it's also interesting that people opened up their homes to Ukrainians in a way they didn't for other refugees. And could it be that there's, you know, this idea of an open Europe? I'm a little bit cynical about that, if I'm honest. I see the debates here in the UK about immigration and about asylum seekers, and yet Ukrainians were actively welcomed. Is it because they're highly skilled white Europeans? That's another debate for another time. 2023 Liverpool, it was very much Ukraine's contest in the UK. But I think there are big questions about the future of Eurovision, certainly with Israel this year. There's a lot of questions to be answered, and there's not always an answer to them sometimes. Just before I go, I'd like to leave you with some slides. Now, for me, Eurovision is a really significant event, and it's something which we've all grown up with effectively, and it really is, I think, very special, and we're very lucky to have it in Europe. And that quote there was from the 1996 programme booklet, and it spoke about the spontaneous applause which erupted when Bosnia were called in to give their votes. And that actually happened in '94, and it was the voting actually had to be restarted because it was so loud. And it gives you that idea of you not being together, sharing that moment, but also that sense of solidarity with others. This quote is from Bjorn, from ABBA, and I think that's a really special moment. He spoke about Eurovision being a beacon and being, I guess, a weapon to fight against dark forces. And I think what he says is really powerful. And the fact that he's willing to go on record and say something quite so strong, I think speaks volumes. And I think Eurovision really does do that. Certainly after the pandemic, you know, it's a form of escapism. And at a time when broadcasting is changing, Eurovision somehow has bucked the trend. This final slide was a photo that I took in 2005 where people were asked to leave their good wishes for the Ukrainian people. And this makes me actually feel very sad, because that time was very optimistic. It was a time of change in Ukraine. And I often wonder what happened to all those good wishes for the Ukrainian people. Very different times 20 years on. Before I go, I'd like to just say that I think Eurovision is a very special event. It's been an absolute privilege to be involved with it, and it's something we've all grown up with. And I think we're actually very lucky to have it in our continent. It's unique in the television year, at a time when television and broadcasting is changing. People are watching things online, they're streaming things. Eurovision offers something different in the television calendar, and I hope you enjoy the 2024 Eurovision Song Contest and the event goes well today. Thank you very much.
And now we would like to open the floor for questions and Galina's answers. We have a mic. We would like to ask you to, before your question, please say your name and your affiliation. Okay. Bruno, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Brendan Sims. I'm the director of the centre. I really enjoyed the panel. And I'm an historian of the great powers. And historically, there were 5 great powers of pentarchy. And in your picture, there are also 5 great powers, which are the, if I got them right, Italy, the UK, France, Spain, and Germany. And I suppose the question I have is how did that happen, that they were the sort of big five? And then is there not pressure then from rising powers to become one of those five? And what would that mean? And why are some of the existing powers not dropping away? How do those power dynamics work, basically?
So if I understand you correctly, why there is a changing power dynamic, and you saying that Russian place was changing, that it was becoming a bigger player?
Well, if I understand you rightly, there are five who are always there. Is that right?
By the law, because they the biggest contributor, so they're automatically granted.
Okay, but is there no pressure then? Is there no other power country that would be prepared to contribute and then become, you know, the big six or the big seven or something? You know, if you think of it in terms of Security Council reform or something, it would be an obvious issue.
No, I think if somebody would approach Russia significantly early in that process, and with the resources they had, they would probably be up for it, because they guaranteed a place, and it is a stake in the kind of Europeanness project. However, as we know, Russia kind of not necessarily, or at least, you know, Russia is not in Europe as such. Only a certain part of Russia is in Europe, and they would never position themselves as part of Europe. They always position themselves as this very specific empire or post-empire, which is very different from others, very unique, and they're claiming this very unique pathways through 19th century. And if you look at the Russia as the kind of the first Roman, so the Russophone and Russophobes, the Slavophiles, you know, there's kind of, their identity is built on a negation. So they are not Europe. They have this very particular pathway with their traditional values and orthodoxy. And recently, as I said, with this LGBTQ legislation from 2013, it's intensified, where they would say we need to protect our way of life, our traditional values, and we need to withstand this degrading kind of West with their kind of tolerance and permissiveness. So in this case, I think they would never really agree to play on equal footing, because they always position themselves as a very specific and unique empire, which is destined for kind of to save the rest of Europe, which is basically vulgar and, you know, bring in Eurotrash, which they played alone for some time, but then they finally were distancing more and more. So kind of, it's a very tricky question, and ideally, I think the contest would benefit from bigger players with the significant resources. But as it stands right now, we have the permanent members, and UK, I think people in Britain feel pretty much shortchanged investing so much in a contest, and more or less guaranteed not having any return anytime soon. So I'm not sure how kind of much it answers your question.
I'm Kai Briggs. I'm a second-year historian here. I was just wondering if I can get your thoughts on the 2009 contest itself, if you've dived into that at all in your research, given like the fact that it was hosted in Russia, and then you've got the Ukrainian entry, which is very firmly Ukrainian on the stage with the flags, with the drum kit. And you've got Georgia's entry that year as well that wasn't allowed to participate because of the resemblance to Putin in the name of the song. I was just wondering if you can like go in, if you've looked at this contest at all, and if you think it was a big moment for kind of nation presentation with Eastern Europe in the contest.
That's a very interesting question, because you're referring to a year which is quite in the past, and you know I will need to go and refresh my memories with all of the entries. But as our Dr. Eurovision pointed out, and I was trying to say, when the eastward enlargement happened, it constituted one of the key moments for the contest, because there were lots of new players coming in, and one way for them to assert their nationhood and identity was to bring their national kind of identity via the kitschified folk songs or their symbolism, which they managed to smuggle in. And as Paul was helpfully talking about Ukraine and the entries through the years, we can see it now looking backwards, especially with Russian and Ukrainian entries, how much they use the contest to assert their identity, especially Ukraine, when they're bringing these references to their revolution or to the historical moments which are key in their history or the flags. So in this case, I think that one of, especially Ukraine, was one of the key cases which would demonstrate how the contest can be internally politicized, but still to the degree which is tolerable for the broadcasting union, because obviously it's a discretion, they have the final say what to allow and what to ban. If they decided to allow it, at that stage, they probably didn't see it as a highly politicized message, but more as a representation in line with the performance which Ukraine staged. But as I said, I'll need to then look into Georgia's performance in more details because it's quite a long time ago. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Javier, and I guess I'm coming as a Cambridge resident today. My question may be a bit strange, but as a lover of Eurovision, I have seen so many bad songs that I wonder how important it is actually to try to get votes and win compared to positioning the country in a certain way or trying to achieve something else. Do you have an opinion on that?
So can you reformulate it slightly? So how bad the song is?
Or how important is it to actually win in this context compared to other goals that the country may have?
I think if you're going to ask the performers or the country's production team, they would say, you know, we would like to win, but it's not very important for us. But I think in reality, all these resources are invested with the whole sole purpose of winning the contest. And, you know, they're ready to do whatever it takes, whether it's go all the way kitsch or to think of something unusual, kind of in terms of staging now with all the special effects, which kind of, you don't need a lot of dance support. You can do a projection and, you know, last year's entry with the singer which already won it with certain effects, you can actually win it. So I think it is an important, it's exceptionally important nation branding exercise, and the performers who go there and the country's teams working with them, they are there to win. And they take it, as I said, they take it very seriously. So on the surface of it, it's a, you know, camp, a bad taste, kitschified performance where everybody's having fun and carnival, kind of in a carnival fashion, and, you know, people celebrating. But in reality, the whole purpose, you know, to win. So if you need to go all in and be as bad as you can, then you do it because you want to win. And if you look at the European, the Eastern European entries, performers who go to perform there, they're not selected by random voting of the emerging singers. They're normally very well-established performers. They are one of the top level, and they're selected carefully because the country wants to win. Let's say Russia would really think of whom to pick. That's why I mentioned that it's very important to look at the whole production cycle, how it's selected. In certain countries in the UK, people are voting, it's pretty much open and clear who, you know, people won because of the fair voting procedure. In the Eastern European bloc, it can be lobbying, what we saw. There might be a political decision, this performer is going because it's selected by a public vote, but at the same time the song and the performance which are going to be presented is highly politicized because the input from the nation branding team and the cultural industry production team is there. And it's very interesting to speak to the performance to understand the degree of their agency, because I think in many cases they don't really have a say what they're going to do and how they're going to do, and it's decided by their production team with the advice from the establishment, especially if you look at the Eastern European entries where they take it exceptionally seriously. And Britain, you know, I know here, especially the televised version is nice self-irony and mockery, you know, we don't care, but in reality, I think if you speak to the public, they would be really upset if Britain's going to come again at the bottom. So on the level of personal pride, I think it's important to score somewhere high enough, if not to win, but at least not to come at the bottom of the competition.
We root for the UK.
Hiya, thank you for your talk. My name's Alex Berger. I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford. I work on post-Soviet femininity at the Eurovision Song Contest. I have noticed recently Russia's been thinking about, well, talking about bringing back the Intervision Song Contest. I wondered if you had any reflections on that. Like, do you think it'll happen? Do you think it's just posturing? So, yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts are.
That's a very good question. So basically, Russia is talking about a certain contest which was there during kind of the Soviet times. And I think this is an attempt to shift, kind of in relation to the first question, to shift the geopolitical kind of balancing. We don't need your European Union Eurovision competition. We are going to have our own, not comparable, but even better with the countries of a different bloc to kind of create this, some sort of competitive tension, and to, in Russia's side, probably to reestablish equilibrium or a balance. So at this time, I don't think there are any specific measures are taken, but I think as a soft power tool, it can be used in future because we can see how the geopolitical situation is developing and the vector, geopolitical vector is changing. So we don't see any inclination of Russia to kind of go back to the European community. So it might be as well that it might happen. And for example, Belarus was running a certain competition, music competition for a number of years. And they were, when they were allowed, they were inviting European, whatever whom they can afford the European performance. Now they redirected themselves and invite the top performers from the former Soviet Union countries. So I think they might just use this idea and extend it to kind of, with the Russia as the lead, to demonstrate a certain geopolitical stance. So thank you so much for the question, yeah. Sorry, I feel a bit, you know, I'm here kind of with Paul. I actually met him. He's a real kind of fan of Eurovision. And I feel like, you know, I'm here, like you came here to see the whole set of performers, like in Eurovision, I'm here on my own trying to work, but kind of, I know that Paul is so dedicated that he attends every single Eurovision since God knows when, and it's great to see that he managed to make a hobby his life and actual career, but sadly we cannot have him today because I'm sure he is at the Eurovision behind the scenes, which he loves. Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Paddy McAlary, and I'm here from the centre. And don't worry, it's 12 points for me for everything, so you've done fantastic, I think. I have two questions, and one of them kind of comes to that procedural point in terms of actually selecting contestants. Just from your research, do you have any kind of sense of if there is a wider kind of regional divide in the sense of those who have these kind of freer selection contests, like for instance you see in the UK and Ireland and the like, which it all comes across as a little bit less serious, versus where you see this as a very directed nation-building kind of campaign? And my second question is, who do you think is going to win this year?
Okay, for the first question, it's a very good question, and when I started doing my research, I thought of exploring it, but it's exceptionally complicated. And I said, going behind this thing, I think we need to pull in geometrically, you know, multiplied by how many, because you need to go and see the in-country rounds and the pre-country selection. And my kind of statement here is grounded more on observation and the knowledge of the cultural context and the fact that I've been in the UK for the last 20 years. So I understand the fabric of society and the values and kind of which are trickle through into the selection process. But my idea, which hasn't come to fruition yet, is to go to speak to people who are involved in that and speak to the actual production teams, because they have a lot of agencies. What we see on stage and what happens behind the scenes, there are two different things. And what we see at the final day and what happens for a couple of months, it's a completely different process. And there are so many factors going into that, so you need to go and speak to people. So, you know, you cannot really just send the survey and get the answers. You need to go and be part of the team to understand the dynamic, and it needs to be happening in a number of countries. So at one point I kind of thought of doing it and applying for funding, but then I realized that it's a significant task. So if you up for it, we can think about it in future, but it's an interesting aspect to the geopolitics and how it plays out within the selection rounds, which are largely ignored because we see only the finished product as a performance at the end. And the second question? Yes. As you know, it's completely, it can be a fluke. Let's say Verka Serduchka was a fluke. Last year's predictions were pretty accurate, unfortunately. Last year, because last year I was living in Finland, and being in Finland and with the Finnish performer was kind of who was winning it and lost at the very last minute was very upsetting. And this year, I think the bookie's favorite is Croatia, if I'm not mistaken. So we can just say, let's go and see if it's going to happen, and I don't really have any particular answer. So you don't use me as a betting device. I cannot predict the future.
I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions. So, yeah.
Hello, I'm Natalie. I'm a local Cambridge resident as well and a big fan of Eurovision. So most of the entries year by year are singing in English. However, you do always notice a few countries year on year kind of wanting to sing in their own language. I think a few that spring to mind are France, Russia, sometimes Spanish. So I just wondered if you have any comment on that, and is that kind of a message of defiance? Is that where they care less about winning and more about promoting their culture and their traditions? And I just wondered if you had any thoughts around that.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because as you correctly observed, it's France who regularly comes, or Spain, and they're the permanent members, so they can do basically whatever they want, and they will participate next year, so they don't have to go through the promotion rounds. And I think that gives them a little bit more space for maneuver. And we know France, with the dedication to French language, I think for them it's also part of the national identity and nationhood and expression of kind of stance, which kind of, they have the freedom to do so. Some of the countries occasionally would resort to their national languages to transmit a certain message, whether it's linked to a particular event, to a particular kind of cultural memory which they sing about. But as you correctly observed, most of the countries resort to the English language because it gives while broader reach, the audience would relate to this song more, and it increases the chances for winning. While in case of Russia, they regularly use Russian language, or more frequently than other nations, because I think for them it was a way of asserting their stance, and kind of the way, they would engage into the kitsch as a way of complying with the cultural, the competition ethos. And at the same time, they wanted to claim a stake of their own identity and independence, and they used the language and lack of background, let's say, support, performative supported dance team or whatever, to assert that they can also do as they please. So the language it can be used by smaller or bigger nations to strategically broadcast certain message, whether they decide to do it occasionally because they cannot really afford it to do it regularly, smaller nations, or bigger nations which are permanent members, or the bigger nations with the bigger capital and power in the geopolitics. But I'm sure that France, for example, will be giving us something in French, and Spain something in Spanish, and it's actually, I think it gives this flavor to the contest. Yeah. I'm surprised nobody was asking about Australia and how it relates to the...
Well, maybe Elvira has a question.
So Australia, how is it related to Eurovision?
No, but I think Australia raises this question of what is Europe and who participates and why. And if you look at the European Broadcasting Union, there are some countries who can actually participate in the contest because they are members of the Broadcasting Union, but they don't have resources, for example, to participate. But maybe I can direct the question to the audience. What do you think? Why we have Australia and why it should participate? Because now it seems that, let's say, if Australia is going to win, does it mean that the whole contest is moving to Australia and we all have to go there? So geopolitical realm of Eurovision is expanding, and this year I think America very predictably is more interested in it due to the geopolitical tension, because it was generally and traditionally very European event, because let's say when I was teaching international students, to the Chinese students, for example, I had to explain what Eurovision is because it's a very specific cultural phenomenon. But I think now it's expanding, let's say Americans really understanding because geopolitics brings it into the fore. But Australia remains a mystery. What happens if Australia is going to win? And they're doing quite well every year. Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about, because we haven't really mentioned the Scandinavian region or Sweden more specifically, because we all heard about ABBA and Sweden winning 50 years ago. But could you please comment on how and why Eurovision became such a question of prestige for Sweden, for example, or why they are the most successful?
It seems like I'm now an expert in everything, but I'll try to answer, because I think that, as I said, I spent some time in Finland, which I enjoyed, and let's leave it at there. At that, I'm not advertising Finland. It's not. I just don't want it to become a major tourist hotspot like you have it here, because it's becoming more and more difficult even to visit Cambridge, as it seems. You were over-tourist, exposed to tourism. I think the Nordic countries, they're quite small, and they have more limited resources and options on what to build their national identities. And let's say Finland and Sweden, they are really focusing on design, on certain industries related to the intellectual input. And the resources are quite limited, the weather is quite difficult, so there are only certain dimensions which you can explore and invest. And for them, it seems like quite a logical industry to invest, and they seem to be coping with that very well. And kind of every time they host Eurovision, they do it very skillfully, showcasing their diversity, gender equality, with the humor, which is, I think, very successful. So I think the Eurovision plays into their strengths and the industries which they invested in developing for quite some time, related to the creative industries. We all know kind of the Scandinavian noir, the dramas, the literature, the design, and it fits very well into the creative and cultural industry sector, which they're very strong. So I think no pressure on Sweden, no, but I'm sure they will put a great show tonight, but not to mention that Britain also did a very good job while helping Ukraine out as well. So because it's also one of the strong points of British cultural industry sector.
Thank you. Well, I feel like we're reaching a kind of close, but I also should mention, I have the very important job of mentioning that we do have wine over in the back, so please do take a drink after we've wrapped up. But thank you very much for coming, and please go have another round of applause for our brilliant speaker and question answer. Yeah, and